Alright, welcome to Steering for Immersion. Based on my article Steering for Immersion in 5 Nordic Larps, a new understanding of eläytyminen. In the booklet I also describe this as how to cry more at Larps. So what this essentially is me talking about my characters and how I managed to cry or didn't manage to cry at Larps. In Finnish tradition, if you tell somebody about the character, you have to buy them a beer first. Unfortunately, you can't have a beer here, so you have to smuggle in your own beer or leave in the middle for Keltsu and drink beer there. But I will be telling you about 5 characters that I played in 5 Nordic Larps, 2 of them in Finland. And key elements here are character immersion, or in Finnish, eläytyminen, and steering, which is a much newer phenomenon. I've usually tried to steer my play towards immersing in cathartic emotional experiences through my character. And more often this has come through experiencing Saturnine melancholy. I'm going to explain all these terms first and then talk a little bit about my actual LARP experiences. First, character immersion, or eläytyminen. The definition I have for it is immersion is the player assuming the identity of the character by pretending to believe their identity only consists of the diegetic roles, which means that you pretend to be your character, and then once you keep doing it, it starts feeling right. It starts feeling real, and eventually you only feel what your character feels, and you sort of become your character. So that's what I mean by character immersion, or eläytyminen. And then another word is character immersion or eläytyminen. Another word is steering. And we've talked about immersion for 10 years or 20 years, but steering is something I was only introduced to last year at Knudepunkt, even though I think it's something everybody will find familiar when they have it explained to them. At least I did. In The Art of Steering, Markus Montola, Elinor Saitta, and Jaakko Stenroos define steering like this. Steering is the process in which a player influences the behavior of her character for non-diegetic reasons. Which means that, I mean, of course, everything that happens in a LARP is player influencing the actions of the character, the behavior of the character. But this means that out-of-character motivations guide the character in some direction. For example, if the player really wants to kiss somebody at the LARP, and then the character has to figure out a reason to do that. Or the player really feels like they have to win the LARP in some way, and then the character keeps trying to kill everybody. In my case, the out-of-character motivation is that of delving deeper into the character and guiding the character towards experiencing strong emotions. Like, if the character was sane and sort of like a normal person, they would probably avoid strong emotions whenever possible. But I'm in the LARP for the purpose of experiencing those strong emotions in a safe context, so I have to sacrifice that character's attempts to save themselves from those emotions in order to experience them myself. And finally, Saturnine melancholy. When I'm watching movies, I'm most typically moved to tears when the scene deals with generations passing, time moving on, sons becoming fathers, mothers becoming grandmothers, hints of new babies eventually becoming unrecognized names on graves. You know, the stuff that Eino Leino is made of, that kind of stuff. I've heard this feeling is called Saturnine melancholy. Saturn is the Roman god of agriculture and time. Agriculture, of course, is based on these cycles of death and rebirth and harvest and death again and so on. So Saturn has a way of eating his own babies. And that's inspired lots of artists, not just me. There's a couple of pictures of Saturn eating his babies. One by Rubens and another more famous one by Francisco Goya. Since, like the one in the 13th Warrior, where the Vikings going to battle recite, "Lo, there do I see the line of my people, back to the beginning. Lo, they do call to me, bid me take my place among them." That always gives me the chills, even now. Or the wedding scene in the Fiddler on the Roof, where they sing "Sunrise, Sunset." "Is this the little girl I carried? Is this the little boy at play? I don't remember growing older. When did they?" Why I am particularly prone to this Saturnine melancholy, I don't know. That's maybe a topic for another essay or like a psychiatric evaluation. But I know I know it works for me, and I know to steer for it. Is there anybody here who doesn't understand Finnish at all? Okay, we're probably going to have maybe somebody who wants to hear English speaking later on, but I'm going to read a short passage from the script to Musta aurinko, melankolian kulttuurihistoria, which is like a radio documentary series broadcast last year, and they're going to rebroadcast it this year by Kaisa Pulakka. And she talks a lot about, well, she only talks about melancholy and how it's seen in culture and so on. And this is where she introduces the concept of Saturnine melancholy. I think she basically invented it. "Sinä aamuna, kun täytin 34, jouduin syvän melankolian tunteen valtaan. Saturnaalinen melankolia vyöryi ylitseni. Makasin peittojen alla ja tajusin, että tässä elämä on. Nuuruus on peruuttamattomasti ohi. Kaikki on ohi. Olin mielestäni saavuttanut kaiken, mitä saavutettavissa on. Työn, perheen, talon, farmariauton. Toisaalta ymmärsin, etten millään ehtisi saavuttaa kaikkea, mistä olin nuoruudessani unelmoinut. Vanhuus alkaisi huomenna. Elämällä ei ollut enää muuta odotettavaa kuin yhä nopeammin kuluvat tunnit kohti kuolemaa. Tämän karun tosiasian edessä sorruin kyyneliin. Jaksoin murehtia noin 5 minuuttia. Sitten laskin todennäköisesti jäljellä olevat työ- ja elinvuodet. Ja sitten, and then life goes on. But hearing about Saturnine melancholy from her, it made me realize that that's quite a bit what I've been going for in LARPs. The first example where it works quite well is from Capella Maggie 10 Kesäyö, which is Capella Maggie is a Finnish Harry Potter LARP series set at the uncanonical Finnish magic school Capella Maggie. I attended the 10th episode. My character was Severi Saraste. Okay, this is me telling about my character. So brace yourself. Severi Saraste, a bureaucrat from a well-known family of dark magic users. He wanted nothing to do with his family, but knew that his job and connections depended on them. Severi's job in the LARP was to be part of a ministry envoy overseeing the Capella Maggie school, and to make sure that the pure-blood kids in the school had everything they needed. During the course of the LARP, Severi and some students were imprisoned by Aurors, the magic police, because of their ties to a secret cabal of pure-blood extremists. After a few hours, the students were released. Neither Saraste or the conspirator students had said anything. The immersion was mostly to the situation of being in a damp cellar, being interrogated, trying not to be found out. Exciting, but not exactly cathartic. Later on, Saraste, now the sole prisoner, was moved to the attic and left alone to ponder upon his actions. After a while of sitting alone in the attic, I noticed my thoughts started drifting away from the LARP into matters of real life work or family or art or food and that kind of stuff. I was running out of inner monologue for the character. So I had to steer my LARP ship out of these low shoals into the high seas of immersion. But I had no chart. So I pulled out my Finnish-style, very long character description, it was like over 10 pages long, detailing Severi's childhood, his contacts, his plots, his background, his dilemmas, his tasks, everything. I figured I would have hours to sit alone, so I read it with care. Severi only has two choices, neither of which are appealing. He can leave the pureblood extremists and gain freedom, but lose everything else. Or continue as before and remain a prisoner of his community. But wait, was he actually offered a third choice now? Come clean to the Aurors and rat out his whole family. They would go to prison and have no power over Sarasti or his career anymore. But did Severi have it in him? So this was just a sort of emotional hook I was hoping to find by rereading the character description. It provided the lengthy alone time with perfect inner monologue. Severi stared out the window thinking about what to do. On the one hand this, on the other hand that. And then the in-game radio started playing a sad wizarding jazz song downstairs. Severi could just hear the melodramatic tone, and then the tears came. After I had enough of crying, Severi demanded to see the Aurors again. I wish to change my statement. In what way? I wish to confess. So after that, the game, of course, took a whole new direction for myself and for many other players, including the Aurors and the other conspirators. I had not planned for this in any way, and neither had the character writer, Lissu Ervasti. But by chance and steering and character immersion, I received the full Aristotelian experience. First, an insoluble dilemma in Act 1, at the beginning of the LARP, or in the character description, and then getting into trouble because of that dilemma in Act 2, which is most of the LARP, and being imprisoned, and then a recognition of some inner truth, which Aristotle calls anagnorisis, and a complete turn of direction, peripeteia, resulting in the outcome that at first would have seemed impossible in Act 3. So the immersive experience would have been just as strong, of course, without the turning point, but in this case it happened to serve as fuel for more interesting game content for everybody. Continuing with Finland. Halat Hisar, played a year and a half ago in Parkano, was set in an alternate reality where the Palestinian situation had happened in Finland. The fictional Ugric religious group had taken parts of Finland, and all Finns lived under occupation in south coast, responding to the West Bank, or the Åland Islands, Ahvenanmaa, corresponding to the Gaza Strip. It was played in Parkano in November 2013 and organized by a Palestinian Finnish team, members of which are present here with us. The LARP was set at the Helsinki University in divided Helsinki. My character, Tuomas Kallo, was described as the conflicted realist. He was running for the head of the student council as one of the Social Democratic Liberation Party, Fatah, candidates, or in Finnish, Demari. Other parties were the Party of Christ, Hamas, the Pan-Nordic Liberation Front, and the Socialist Resistance Front. My dramatic function was explained in the character description. You represent the establishment, and through you, maybe the radical roots of today's ruling party can be seen. In this reading, I was essentially a younger Finnish version of Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. Early on in the Larp, soldiers from the Ugric Defense Force, which is essentially the Israeli military, occupied the university and placed it under curfew. Students and faculty were arrested, interrogated, and tortured. Here in the picture is a blockade by the soldiers and students protesting. That's my character with the megaphone back there, being sure he's not hit with any guns. And other characters more in the front, without the megaphone. The big turning point and the cause of emotional turmoil for Tuomas Kallo was a student demonstration against the UDF soldiers. I took the megaphone and led the group in singing nationalist songs. Some people yelled slogans and other threw rocks. The other megaphone was held by a fellow candidate, the socialist Mari Isola, played by Jamie McDonald, who was just here talking about gender in LARPs. Mary was the de facto leader of the demonstration and got into a shouting match with one of the soldiers. Things got aggressive and a UDF soldier shot Mary. Somebody called the ambulance, which drove towards the demonstration, but was held by the soldiers at the roadblock, and then forbidden to get too close to the bleeding student. And when the medical professionals finally got to Mary, she was already dead. So Mary's death was such a blow that it effectively ended the demonstration. We went back to the university building, everyone full of emotions, sadness, shock, bitterness, anger, fear. I was ready to let the emotions wash over me. It was time to steer towards Saturnine melancholy. For that, I walked around the building in turmoil, and finally I found the perfect Turku-style location for solitary immersion. There was a lookout tower. Otherwise it was like a big school building or a youth house, but there was a lookout tower with a very small room on the top, and in every direction windows to the blackness that is Finnish November. There was even one chair there. Just one, like it was designed for somebody to be alone in there. Maybe it was, I don't know. In case it was, kudos to the game masters. So I went there and stared out the window into the dramatic darkness, seeing soldiers marching on the campus. How horrible. Had I chosen the right path? Would we avenge Mary? Would we hold a vigil for her? Should I be more radical? What would my father have done had he not been killed by UDF soldiers? This is perfect Saturnine melancholic material for emotional immersion. But then I, the player, remembered something. This LARP used the black box technique, and I had decided to try that out. It's a big Nordic thing which is slowly coming to Finland, and I'd never really experienced it. So I imagined that the emotional potential triggered by Mary's death would be prime material for blackboxing. So I took the wheel, made a quick U-turn, and for steering metaphor, and walked the stairs down to the black box room. Unfortunately, the black box was taken. Many players had scenes to play with Mary, flashbacks and dreams and that kind of stuff. What could have been? So Mary's player would soon have to go and do something else. So all this had to be done now. Mohammad Rabah, the game master in charge of the black box, asked me to wait. And this called for very complex steering. I had to hold on to the emotional potential, but not tap into it. Just keep it there. And to do this, I walked around the building, trying to avoid contact with others who might inflict me with dialogue or plots that would dilute the emotional potential. But eventually I made it to the black box and played a played a dream sequence with Muhammad, where Muhammad played my character's father. And after plenty of, "What would you do, Dad?" and "My son, you already know what you have to do," we concluded the scene. I found it difficult to fully utilize the emotional potential I had come in with, perhaps because I lacked mechanisms for steering Muhammad, or because Muhammad had some other aim with the black box scene. I don't know. Maybe we should debrief that at some point. So sometime after the black box scene, we held a small memorial event for Mary. We raised the Finnish flag and sang some sad songs like Maamme, about how we join our ancestors in heaven, and one day we too will fade from memory. And that was what finally made Tuomas Kallo and myself cry. Then a few less successful examples of character immersion, or rather steering for crying. Monitor Celestra was a big Swedish LARP set in the world of the reimagined TV series Battlestar Galactica. The LARP was set in the time of the pilot episode, where almost all mankind has just been destroyed by the Cylon machines. Only a handful of spaceships survived and formed a fleet which included both the military museum ship Galactica, political ship Colonial 1, and the research vessel Celestra. I played the surgeon on board the Celestra, Dr. Pavel Albert. The LARP was played 3 times and all the characters were non-gendered, so I named myself Pavel. So that's Pavel Albert. That's incidentally the guy who is in charge of designing all Disney World and Disneyland amusement parks, who came to learn Nordic LARP, because that's really important for his job. He was my assistant. So the written characters mostly consisted of group briefs like cultural affiliation Tauron, or group Celestra crew, subgroup medical staff, and other affiliations Cylon sympathizer. Before the group briefs, I had a small chapter summarizing my character as a Cylon-loving doctor. Then at the bottom of the description, this Cylon-loving doctor idea was extrapolated and imbued with playing directions and out-of-character duties, such as determining the severity of wounds and illnesses that other characters might have. So the Cylon-loving doctor, it might seem like a fun character to play, but in the actual LARP, the understandable lack of Cylons and limited space for medical practice made this almost irrelevant. I wasn't really a Cylon lover and I wasn't really a doctor, so what was I? I was left with very little of the pre-made material being useful. We were told to flesh out the characters amongst ourselves, which is quite often the case in Swedish and Danish LARPs. In Finnish LARPs, the LARP design is communicated mostly through the characters, so the make your own character style seemed very strange for me, even after a decade and a half of LARPing abroad. But in this case, we were given a forum and told to develop inter-character relations there. Fine. I fleshed out my character by giving him a wife and a family on one of the planets that were destroyed. I made Dr. Pavel Albert a long-haired hippie with a Californian drawl in his speech to very clearly mark him a civilian man, and thus contrast him further with the military personnel dude that I knew would be manning the Celestra at some point. I decided that P. Albert had worked on the Celestra to pay his med school loans, but was now almost done with it, and would get to return to Tauron next week. And I developed some low-key relationships with other players, but unfortunately nothing that would become truly essential in the LARP. And assuming that this was a sandbox-type LARP, I decided the character would try to take over the ship from the eventual military occupation if push came to shove. Like the Cylon-loving doctor description, all of these two became void in the course of the LARP. I ended up having to do a lot of impromptu steering in order to get something out of the LARP. So the aftermath of humanity being destroyed would have been perfect material for character immersion, and even saturnine melancholy. I am the last member of my family. My wife has just died. My parents had died. 99.99% of humanity has just died. But during the course of the game, as of the TV pilot, we would be given new hope of a secret 13th colony of mankind called Earth. Unfortunately, most of this emotional potential was made void by the heavy emphasis on action plots and breaks in the game. The game was divided into 4 acts, with a break between each. Sometimes the break was short. At other times we would leave the location, do the hostel and sleep the night there, and then come back the next day to continue the LARP. There was always a time leap for the characters. Fine, interesting. But the dramatic structure that works for television doesn't always work for LARPs. The big information with the potential emotional impact, Earth exists, we are not alone, was always delivered at the very end of the act, meaning that we never got to play characters reacting to them, and similar problems prevented focus on the everyone you knew is dead aspect of the setting. The time your character would have reacted to that and you would have had these emotional breakthroughs was always in the breaks, so you didn't get to play it. There were plot elements in the LARP too. Is the ship controlled by the original civilian crew or the military visitors? What side is the presidential representative on? Does Celestra conduct the Cylon ship or the refugee ship? Do we have Cylons on board? Interesting stuff. I don't know how well these main plots worked in other runs of the LARP, but in the second one that I attended, the whole system was unfortunately broken. And eventually during the course of the LARP, I realized that the LARP was not built like a sandbox that I expected, and that the main plots were strangely impenetrable. And what I was left with was more like an amusement park. Well, good for him. Which means that there's a room where this sort of things goes on, and you can talk to this character and have sort of this dialogue with them, and then you can go to the lab, and you can go to the command center and to the engineering, and whenever somebody goes there, this is what happens. Just sort of go there for a ride, and then you go to another ride in another place. For me, it worked like this. Dr. Pavel Albert went to a location, event, or prison, like the AI lab, the bridge, the mutiny, the murder, the presidential aide, or the Cylon prisoner, and interacted with everybody as much as possible. So when the situation had exhausted its dramatic potential, he went on to a new location. This was most apparent when interacting with Game Master played supporting characters, such as the Cylon prisoner. Eventually, dialogue with the prisoner started to repeat itself, like talking to a non-player character in a video game. So these emergency steering maneuvers eventually led to meaningful emotional content too, as Dr. Albert, the presidential aide, and a few others started hatching a plan to steal a shuttle and flee from the Celestra altogether. Other people had a much more pleasant experience, but this was my failure to have like a proper emotional experiences at Celestra. Next failure happened at Koikoi last summer in Norway. Koikoi was a LARP about Stone Age hunter-gatherers played in Norway in July 2014 for 4 days. The LARP was played in numerous Scandinavian languages, and us Finns played strangers from a neighboring tribe that had recently become humans. That is, members of this tribe. My character, Duskain, was a loincloth-wearing loincloth-wearing warrior married into the bear family. The LARP was only a little about any single character's individual dilemmas and dramas, and quite a lot about the society going about its business. Children becoming men, women and Nuke, young men and women traded to other families to bear new children, and the old dying and being remembered. It should have been a perfect opportunity for some Saturnine melancholy, but somehow I never got there. All the instances of transformation were ritualized, which made perfect sense for the LARP, and could easily have added to the atmosphere. So we had a manrit for children becoming men, a kvinnrit for children becoming women, a nukrit for children becoming nuke, dödsrit for old people dying, minsrit for remembering those who had died after the previous koi meeting, and several family rites for leaving one family and joining another. Some families even had washing rites or breakfast rites, that kind of stuff. So between all those rituals and the getting ready for the rituals, the content of my LARP was mostly about hanging with my family, sleeping with people from other families, and dancing and telling stories in the big tent-like house. In a modern day LARP, I would have brought a book for my character to read during downtime. In this case, storytelling took that part. I listened to stories, performed in stories, and told stories of my own. As a professional writer, coming up with stories is something I enjoy doing, and I'm quite experienced at it. Unfortunately, I ended up steering too much into coming up with stories for others to hear, instead of steering for getting everything out of whatever situation I'm in. Most of the time I didn't realize this is a problem until after the LARP. But after the minnesrit, the memory rite, where we remembered the dead, and everybody told stories about their loved ones, I was disappointed to not have really felt it. All the elements were there, the generations passing, everyone having lost their loved ones, us becoming aware of our own mortality, and of the fact that others will eventually take our place and tell stories of us. We even had a few ancestors, nukes with masks, watching us. It should have been a cry fest for me, but it wasn't. Nuke is the third gender in this LARP, who often act as shamans. Here's an old nuke leading a ritual. But for some reason, the memory rite didn't do it for me. During the minnesrit, I spent too much brain power on trying to come up with a story to tell. Like, I was a recent addition to the tribe, but maybe I'd killed one of them earlier when I was still a stranger, and that might be a powerful emotional twist. But who and how, and why did they only die now instead of when I killed them? Or are there actually too many stories going on, and this is all kind of boring for everybody, and it takes too long to get through the mandatory memories without me adding new ones. What I should have done is steer for experiencing this full-on, seeing us there in the millennial line of people coming there to hear memories, share memories, and become memories. It is possible that due to my character's outsider and barely developed past, I lacked points in which to attach such emotions. At times during the LARP, I felt not as my character, but only as myself as a hunter-gatherer. Then I tried to figure out a more complex personality or backstory for my character during the LARP. Maybe I'm a spy from the strange tribe who was examining this tribe for weaknesses to exploit. One of the designers of Koi, Eirik Fatland, has spoken about how Aragorn in The Prancing Pony would be a horrible character for a LARP, since he would have no connection to any of the other characters or the plots amongst the other visitors. The only thing he would have is an inner monologue, which Fatland parodises like this: I am Aragorn, I am so cool. I am Aragorn, I am so cool. but an inner monologue of that kind would have been preferable to having no inner monologue at all. For me personally, Koiko was a very powerful experience and an excellent LARP, but in this sense a failure in steering for emotional immersion. But even outside of Finland, it's not always a failure. Excuse me. We're going to have room for questions and comments and that kind of stuff when I'm done. This is the last character I'm going to tell you about. College of Wizardry was a Danish-Polish LARP played in November 2014 at the Pohjola Castle in Poland. And just frequently there was a sequel and a rerun, and they're going to have more LARPs in that world or something like it in that castle November this year, and then maybe more later on. The LARP was set at a magic university in the Harry Potter world, almost 20 years after the books. I played Bombastus Bane, Professor of Dark Arts. Defense against the Dark Arts, I mean. Essentially the Professor Snape of this LARP. The Professor characters were more or less created by the players themselves, but the organizers were quick to react to our ideas about contacts and plots. Bane's whole family, mother, father, wife, had been in the wizard prison Azkaban since the war portrayed in the books. Bane's wife had been pregnant at the time of imprisonment and had given birth to their son, Vladimir, in prison. Vladimir had grown up in Azkaban, surrounded by dementors and criminals. So Friday at lunch, Bane received a letter informing him that his wife had passed away at Azkaban. So I realized this is prime material for heavy emotions washing over me, and immediately steered towards that. I left the dining room immediately and walked to the dark forest in order to wallow in these emotions alone. Very Turku very Finnish style. But while I was in the dark forest, I realized that the playing style of this LARP was actually very anti-Finnish. And it would actually benefit from me making this as public as possible, and decided to make a steering turnabout. So I returned to the dining hall to attack the Auror in the black there, who Bane assumed that was responsible for killing his wife. The private emotion now became a public spectacle, Danish style. Essentially, this meant that I suppressed the emotional potential in the death of Bane's wife and created a dramatic scene instead. A scene which would later on bring more emotional potential to be explored, fortunately. And of course, attacking somebody like a police officer with a gun or a wand in the middle of the dining hall doesn't end well, so here's Bane essentially de-wanded, and situation diffused, but everybody got lots of dramatic play out of it. And when the immediate conflict was resolved, the Auror, the woman in black, took Bane to a private location and explained what had happened. Professor Bane, your wife didn't die naturally. She was killed. By whom? By your son, Vladimir. Horrible news for Bane, but great material for emotional immersion. Of course, Bane was very distraught, but didn't cry his heart out yet. What finally broke his heart, and mine, was the sorting ceremony on the evening of that day. Looking at all the new juniors walking to their houses and being cheered, by other students, Bain suddenly realized that Vladimir was 19 and this year he would have been a junior. My thoughts, like the player's thoughts and Bain's thoughts, briefly touch on this idea while observing the sorting. And it immediately triggered a strong, sad emotion. The kind of emotion that one normally steers away from in real life. But the LARP is a safe place for experiencing that kind of stuff, so I steered right into it. One never knows what one finds when exploring these subconscious emotional triggers, but in this case my LARP ship crashed into an island of gold. Sorry about the metaphors. So I started thinking that if Vladimir hadn't grown up in Azkaban, he would have been sorted into House Fausts, and Bain would have been so proud. Or sorted into some other house, and Bain would have had these petty arguments with his son. And Vladimir would be so excited about all those student crushes and initiation rituals and all the ordinary life of a 19-year-old wizard, which would never happen. And maybe his mother Miranda would have been there on the balcony with Bain, watching him, which would never happen. I cried in and off for like an hour about this, first looking down at the ceremony, then afterwards when a student which took Bain aside and he poured his heart out to her. So even though the LARP College of Wizardry itself was far from tragic or sad, it provided the backdrop for a great experience of cathartic Saturnine melancholy. So steering is a very useful way for a player to analyze their behavior after the LARP. By understanding the idea behind steering, the player can also realize when they are doing it during the LARP, and it can make steering easier and more fruitful. Steering doesn't need to happen in speech or actions. It can also happen inside the player, guiding for more interesting thoughts. So I've given 5 examples of trying to steer towards emotional immersion in emotional experiences within character immersion. Some of them were successful, some were not successful. And in the case of Celestra, I had to abandon the goal mid-game and steer for something else. Only the 2 last LARPs mentioned, Koi Koi and College of Wizardry, happened after the introduction of the concept of steering. The concept allowed me to better understand even the LARPs I had played before it. But in the case of College of Wizardry, I remember actively thinking about steering as I was doing it. Like, okay, now I have to steer for this, because that makes sense. Steering is good. So, that's it for the planned part of this presentation. You can also find the text online and in this book, the Knudepunkt 2015 companion book. And it's published on the Nordic LARP wiki as well. Now we have plenty of time for any comments and questions. Or let me tell you about my character. If you feel like it. If not, we're gonna stop and go see the gala. Any questions or comments? Mona.
I was wondering, like, if you are steering, but you're going to have an emotional, maybe. Does it work?
Yes.
So I was wondering, wouldn't steering for emotional immersion and experiencing emotional immersion create a conflict in your experience? How does that work out for you?
It indeed. If you're 100% immersed, you can't really steer, because the steering has to be done by the player. But if you're 100% immersed, the player is not in charge of your cognitive capabilities. So you can only steer when you're 90% immersed, or 80% immersed, or 0%. That is correct. But in my experience, even though you're striving to be immersed all the time, you're not successful all the time. So when you're not successful, it makes sense to steer for something that will make immersion easier. So essentially, if you're not completely immersed in your character, steer for immersion. Steer for more immersion. Johanna.
I just have a very short example of very physical steering for immersion from also from College of Wizardry, because at the end of that game there was a lot of like ending events. Here's the ending battle against the Dementors, and here's the ending ritual. So I walk out of the castle and I think, wait a minute, that's too like plot oriented. I'm gonna fall out of character if I walk in that direction. But if I go there, then I will be confused by this plot that I dropped in the middle of the larp, so I will be also out of character. But if I take a sharp right turn here, I will be able to immerse further and not be like attacked by all these elements that will break my game. So it's kind of a physical minefield of elements that I have to physically steer through to be able to maintain some kind of game coherence. But it was very, in my LARP career, it was maybe the most obvious example of steering I can think of.
So you would actually have this like emotional area and action area.
Yes, I was since all of my comments are already said, I was going to ask, have you tried? You seem to be like this after crying dopamine junkie in a way. Have you tried any chemicals or to enhance this?
What would you recommend?
Okay, actually, I was going to recommend for me this Saturnic melancholy works way harder when I'm sleep deprived, for example.
Actually, that often happens in a LARP by accident.
No, just by accident. But since I know how this mechanism works, I realize that I'm tired when I feel okay. I could cry here.
Interesting. So you could try these different pills and different like sleep deprivation and that kind of stuff to get more out of these feelings. I guess everybody's always sleep deprived at LARPs, especially if they go on longer. Yeah. Maria, did you have something?
Yeah. Have you tried any other feelings except for this one?
No, just this.
Would that be interesting to you, or is this like your thing? You don't want any other feelings you would steer towards?
Well, that's a fair question. I guess this is talking about this very particular feeling seemed interesting for me since I only discovered a name for it very recently. But of course, sometimes you can steer for stuff that will make you feel even good. For example, if a LARP is set at a disco, you might steer for making out with beautiful people because you lack that in your real life, or you might have we had in the College of Wizardry sequel, Maria played my surprised daughter, and we had a very lovely time and a happy ending, surprisingly, for the LARP, which is a very fresh change from most LARPs. But I guess it's a good sign if my regular life has enough positive emotions that I don't have to steer towards those in LARPs. But I do know people who do that and actively steer away from negative emotions because they might trigger like real life depression or whatever in the player. Mona.
I and this guy had an experience at our first short LARP festival in Tartu in Estonia. And it was the last LARP of Saturday. It was about us being refugees who were picked up off the Swedish coast by Swedish officials. And the fact that I had already played 2 small LARPs and I was really tired basically made it more effective. And also the fact that the refugees got processed one by one. So I was the last person left. And I didn't really steer because it just went well enough on its own. But our game master made the mistake of doing a guided meditation, and she used the same thing in the beginning of the LARP and at the end. But it actually made everything worse. So I was actually emotionally broken up about it for like a few days. But yeah, tiredness can like make it much, much worse. So I would say that if you're at all depressive, like me, then be careful, because it can mess with you.
It is true. Any other comments from up there? Saa kysyä suomeksi, toistan sen englanniksi.
Miten se voiko metodia tavallaan ajatella silleen, että saisi lisättyä muidenkin tavallaan sellaista emotionaalista voimaa? Et kun mä ymmärsin, että tämä on sellainen metodi, jolla tavallaan sä tavallaan pelaajana mietit, että miten tästä suunnataan syvempiin vesiin, niin onko sitten joku oma sana sillä tavalla, että saadaan tavallaan semmoinen vaikka ryhmässä tai parin kanssa semmoinen yhteinen tavallaan voimistettu sitä immersio. Käsittääkö tämä sellaisenkin?
Great question. So the question is about not just enhancing the level of immersion for yourself, but enhancing it for everybody in the LARP or in the group or with your partner. And if there's methods or words for that. In my experience, if you're, let's say you're LARPing a king, but you're doing it alone, you might just feel like a dude or a lady with a crown. But if you have 10 people bowing to you and treating you like a king, then you feel like a king. So them being immersed in the world or the characters helps you be immersed in yours, and vice versa. And this creates like a cycle of immersion, which are called inter-immersion, because everybody sort of builds it together. I mean, of course you can have character immersion alone, but this sort of helps create the situation, the context for that. So I would say that just by being more immersed in your character probably gives something to the others, but of course showing it, like instead of just being depressed, also crying, so other people can see that you're depressed or sad, it gives more to the players. But that's, I'm not sure if that's maybe like how you play. In the Nordic circles, they speak about, what's that word, like, wait, I used that word in the book, I just left it out when I read it. Inclusive play. Playing inclusively, meaning that, well, for example, when I'm immersed alone in the forest, instead of just going through all the emotions there, I go to the restaurant and pour it for everybody. So everybody gets play out of it, and when the character starts crying on the balcony, he's not ashamed and goes away, but instead he's there and everybody can see it. Oh my God, he's going through something, and then maybe somebody else is going through something as well, and oh no, I'm crying. And that kind of stuff. So I think it really helps. This is sort of getting a little bit off topic, but since we have time, I'm gonna tell the anecdote from Monitor Celestra. We had a secret meeting with the presidential aide. Or actually, he had a secret meeting with some other people, and I just stumbled into it. It was held at this like a really crowded room full of refugees and military people and whatever, and they're supposed to have a secret meeting. So in a normal LARP, like in a Finnish style LARP, what's the realistic thing to do, of course? Either you go to a secret room, like a cupboard or a cleaning closet, to have your secret meeting there. Or you have some reason to throw everybody out. I'm the presidential aide. I demand this room, everybody out. But instead what he did is, well, this is we're having a meeting here, and you're all under NDA. You can't speak about anything that happens in this room. But I truly welcome all citizen opinions and citizen input on this. And then they're going to have the meeting, and everybody who wants to get in on the meeting can just sit in the table or yell something from the corner. That might be like a topic for another lecture, and I think nobody in Finland is really good at it, but it's an interesting concept that we should maybe be doing more. But for myself, I've tried to, whenever I have these emotions, more and more have them in a public place, or at least when I'm starting to have them in a public place, not go to the immersion closet or the watchtower or the dark forest, but have them so other people can also experience my character having emotions and perhaps be moved by it. It's a very good question. Thank you. Anybody else?
This is not a question. I would say her question about you wanting to feel other feelings except sadness. I think I really appreciate you talking about sadness, especially because I'm pretty good at feeling fear and despair in games, but not very good at sadness. And like you talk about how you have had failures, but it gives me hope. Maybe even I can sometimes feel sadness in games. I think it's very hard for me because when I go to Larps, and there are a lot of people I don't know, like most of the people are like 29 or 30 people are people I have never met before. Like I have great trouble at like immersing myself in that situation. I think I need to listen. But yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I was just going to ask a quick question since you said you recently discovered this Saturn melancholy as a kind of certain type of melancholy. Are there any kind of evaluations or tests or some kind of do-it-yourself things you might have or anybody else may have found that would be useful for discovering these kinds of emotional triggers?
Not that I know of, but I'm not a psychologist at all. And this is not like a established psychological or even pop cultural term for that emotion. It's, I think, Kaisa Pulakka, the Finnish journalist, like invented it to describe that feeling. Is there
It's like a generic question for everybody in the audience as well.
Is there anybody who wants to take it?
Well, to understand like your emotions, you need to be a sort of anxious, over-analyzing person and consume a lot of media. The more media you consume, the more emotions and ideas you have about it. And when you discuss them with other people, then you might realize that other people feel it too. Because when you described the melancholy, then I'm quite sure I knew what you were talking about. Because it's a very universal emotion. It's just that maybe this interpretation is uniquely Finnish, but the emotion is there. I mean, I know the emotion, so I think other people know it too, if they think about it enough.
My examples were from American movies, so I would assume that it's like more or less human experience, not just Finnish. Oh, steering for it, yes, sure. I got it.
I just wanted to mention about like methods for steering. The black box thing that you talked about in context of Flatisar. The way the black box works, in case not everybody is familiar with it, is that in the LARP there's like a special room, and in the room there's a game master. And in that room you can go like play with the special black box game master, do stuff like we can play out a dream or a future scene or a scene from my past or a possible scene or a scene with my dead father or stuff like that. And I think that when it works well, it's great for steering because you can walk into the black box and say that I need more emotional content in my game. Please deliver black box game master. And then you can talk a little bit like what kind of stuff would you like to have, and then you can work together to make it happen. But that's when it works well. But I've had it work well with me, so I know it can be done.
It's essentially like a little tabletop room within the LARP.
It's exactly that.
They also used it in Monitor Celestra for when the pilots, like the Viper pilots, went on away missions to shoot at Cylon ships or whatever. Then they exited the ship and went to a black box, meaning that they had like a tabletop adventure and came back to the ship. It came back to the inn. All right. Thank you very much. You are wonderful.